Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Our top story today, there has been widespread international condemnation of President Trump's announcement the United States is withdrawing from the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement. UN Chief Antonio Guterres' spokesman called it a major disappointment, while the European Union said it was a sad day for the world. Here, Theresa May has expressed her disappointment over the decision, and North America correspondent David Willis reports.
He'd promised this to the people who voted him into office. Nonetheless, it was a momentous announcement and one which drew swift condemnation from around the world.
As president, I have one obligation, and that obligation is to the American people.
President Trump believes, in a nutshell, that the Paris Accord impedes his ability to restore jobs to parts of the American heartland blighted by the move away from fossil fuels such as coal and gas. Time, in his view, to put America first, a philosophy summed up in one short phrase.
I was elected to represent the citizens of Pittsburgh, not Paris.
Pittsburgh's mayor, Bill Peduto, swiftly responded, saying his city, considered the heart of the American steel industry, actually favoured the Paris Accord. Donald Trump had previously said global warming was a hoax perpetrated by the Chinese. He's now saying he'd be willing to renegotiate the Paris Accord, albeit on terms more favourable to the US. But European leaders want nothing to do with that. There is no Plan B, said one.
France will not give up the fight. I reaffirm clearly that the Paris Agreement remains irreversible and will be implemented, not just by France, but by all the other nations.
Those gathered outside the White House to protest the president's decision believe the departure of the second largest polluter on the planet will have a dramatic impact on efforts to combat global warming. But Donald Trump believes his decision represents an assertion of American sovereignty, whilst his critics believe it is precisely the opposite. David Willis, BBC News, Washington.
Well, the European Union and China are due to reaffirm their commitment to tackling climate change at a summit in Brussels today. Several EU countries have already dismissed suggestions that the US might be able to renegotiate the Paris deal. Damien Grammaticus is in Brussels for us. Damien, so right. What's the line coming out of Brussels? Just how angry are the leaders there?
Well, very, very disappointed. I mean, if you look across the EU, we had the Belgian Prime Minister last night calling this a brutal act. From France, I think the words used there were criminal. We saw, as you say, that joint statement from the French, the Italians and the Germans saying that the climate change accords cannot be renegotiated. Donald Trump can't simply walk away and come back and say he wants to get a better deal in some way. That won't happen, they said. Either the US meets its commitments or it doesn't. So I think very, very disappointed, but also determined to sort of take up the mantle of the leadership of this issue. And what they've made very clear is that if the US won't, then the EU and interestingly too China, the other two global heavyweights, will be stepping in. And that's what we're going to see today here. By coincidence, the Chinese premier in Brussels today for a summit, an annual thing, they will be issuing a special declaration, and that will say that the EU and China consider climate action and the clean energy transition more imperative than ever, and that they will recommit to the targets and the commitments under that.
Well, Damien, we'll pick up on that point because I want to speak to our correspondent Stephen McDonald, who is in Beijing. So from a Chinese perspective, are they seeing this as a real opportunity?
Well, it's interesting that they haven't exactly, well, directly criticised Donald Trump for pulling the US out of the Paris climate process, but simply said, if you don't want to be part of it, well, we'll stand with Europe and others and push forward the climate agenda. Now, this is within hours of Donald Trump pulling the US out of the process. Interestingly, China's #2 leader, Li Keqiang, he's in Europe, and very soon we're going to see a joint statement come out from Li Keqiang and members of the EU reaffirming a commitment to this process. And so, quite apart from any impact on the process around climate change amelioration, we're seeing quite a profound geopolitical shift here, with China standing up on the world stage and becoming, I guess, whether it likes it or not, the leader or one of the chief leaders on climate change. And although it's not said it wanted to grab hold of this mantle, it's nevertheless got it now firmly within its grasp.
Stephen McDonnell in Beijing, Damien Grammaticus in Brussels, thank you for speaking with us. But first of all, we don't want other leaders and other countries laughing at us anymore. Those are the words of President Trump as he announced that the United States is to pull out of the Paris Climate Change Agreement. He's faced a chorus of condemnation internationally and at home. The UN has called it a major disappointment, while the European Union said it was a sad day for the world. Well, China said that the world should cherish the outcome of the Paris Agreement, and it means that the US now sits with Syria and Nicaragua as only 3 countries in the whole world who are not part of the deal. Well, Mr. Trump has said the agreement imposes huge economic burdens and threatens American jobs. Let's have a listen to some of what the president said last night.
In order to fulfill my solemn duty to protect America and its citizens, the United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord, its people, its taxpayers. So we're getting out, but we will start to negotiate, and we will see if we can make a deal that's fair. And if we can, that's great. And if we can't, that's fine.
Well, the newly elected French President Emmanuel Macron became the first president to make a statement in English from the Élysée, Paris, where he attacked the US president.
I can assure you, France will not give up the fight. I reaffirm clearly that the Paris Agreement remains irreversible and will be implemented, not just by France, but by all the other nations. Because wherever we live, whoever we are, we all share the same responsibility. Make our planet great again.
I'm sitting here with a couple of people to talk about this because it would be fascinating to get your views. Joanna Haigh is with me. She's co-director of the Grantham Institute, which researches climate change and its impact. And Oxfam's head of global policy and campaigns, Sally Copley, who has oversight for Oxfam's campaigns around climate change. Reckless and dangerous? Joanna, would you agree with that?
Yes, it's very reckless and foolish as well. The world came together at the Paris meeting in 2015 and agreed that we were going to do something together against climate change and to get the temperature of the world increased less than 2 degrees over the century. And for the Americans to pull out is a real serious blow.
What effect do you think it will have for people here in the UK, but also around the world, in your view, Sally?
Well, we think it's immoral, we think it's untenable, and we think it's absurd making this decision to pull out of the Paris Agreement. Already, millions of people across the world are feeling the effects of climate change, so I think it's beyond dispute. But actually, the real impact is very real in people's lives. So we know that climate change means more erratic weather, extreme weather, unpredictable rainfall, droughts and floods, and that means for the poorest people in the world, who frankly have done nothing to cause this, they already are feeling the effects, and they are feeling the worst of the effects. It means damaged crops, lost homes and completely collapsed livelihoods. But we do feel that in the UK as well, when we've seen in recent years floods that have happened that wouldn't have happened before. And just on a very local level, in a very developed nation, we can see the damage that does to people's lives. So that, I mean, the impacts are real and then being felt now.
So what effect will the US pulling out actually have on that? Because, of course, we've seen that China and the European Union, there's only 3 countries around the world that aren't part of the Paris Agreement. So how important is it that the US aren't going to be part of that now?
Well, there's several parts to that question. One is actually the effect of America, not doing so much to reduce its emissions. Now, they've already peaked emissions, but what will happen is that their reduction will be slower than planned. And very preliminary calculations suggest that might mean perhaps 1 or 2 tenths of a degree above the target that we're hoping for by the end of the century. That doesn't sound much, but actually that, in terms of the impacts that was already been described, is quite serious. Nevertheless, as you say, it seems that other countries are going to carry on regardless of the United States, and indeed having more energy in doing things to address the issue. So maybe it's not quite as bad as we might originally have thought.
Because we spoke to our correspondent in Beijing earlier on, and he was saying that the Chinese have almost found themselves now as the climate change leaders, whether they like it or not.
Yes, and that's why we think it's untenable, because we've already seen across the states, from the East Coast to the West Coast, we've seen from companies, mayors are standing up, state governors are standing up, companies are standing up and saying, actually, we're still going to do that. The reason they're doing that is because there is momentum behind it, but also it is urgent. In East Africa now, there are 13 million people facing hunger. In one country, we've got people facing famine, and we predict that by 2030, if we don't take this urgent action, climate change in and of itself will lead 100 million people into extreme poverty. So this is a real urgency to this.
Do you want to pick up on that? I can see you were nodding.
Yes, I also think that Trump's statements are rather foolish, because he can't get out of the agreement for at least 2 or 3 years formally. I mean, they can do nothing for the next few years. But also, getting out of the agreement, what does that mean? The countries have offered their reductions in the first place, so it's a voluntary thing. So the whole idea is it's just a bit of a muddle, and it's just a sort of token to the right wing in the United States that he can say this.
Well, Donald Trump, of course, is saying America first. I'm delivering on what I said, and I want to bring coal back, and I want to create more jobs. Is there a market for selling coal?
No, I mean, this is the absurdity of it. I mean, there are more jobs in solar and wind energy, but the majority of people in the States think we need to take action around climate change. I mean, he's now going to be... I mean, I heard last night Nicaragua, there's just 2 other countries who haven't signed up to the Paris Accord, and that's Syria and Nicaragua. Now, Nicaragua didn't sign up because it didn't go far enough, they said. I heard talk last night, they're saying, actually, we'll sign up because we don't want to be left with Trump and President Assad of Syria. I mean, that just speaks volumes. It's absurd.
One thing I wanted to know about was clean energy is getting cheaper, isn't it? So does that mean that people are investing in it and then it can take over? Will the Chinese, for example, invest in that technology?
They are already investing hugely, and if America's not careful, it'll be left behind the curve, still investing in dirty old energy, coal and all the bad effects that has, while the rest of the world is investing in new clean energy and getting all the benefits from it.
Absolutely, and in fact the alternatives we can do, I mean, adaptation is a really important part, not just preventing climate change getting any worse, but actually helping families and households to cope now. So we're helping families, for example, in Bangladesh, where we're helping people build homes above floodwater, toilets above floodwater, even helping families actually develop floating gardens. In South Africa, we're working with farmers to help them build more durable crops that actually mature quicker, so they're less susceptible to the unpredictable rainfalls. I mean, there are things that are happening that are exciting, they're innovative, and that is where I think the smart moves would be to go, because that's where the growth will be.
And Donald Trump is also talking, isn't he, about wanting to renegotiate this deal. And if he can renegotiate the deal so he's happy with it, he's willing to sign up to it. What are the chances of that?
Well, it's not clear what he means. He can't actually renegotiate the deal, except in as far as saying that he will produce less contributions to the emissions than he'd previously said. There's an interesting, actually, parallel with what happened at the Kyoto Accord in 2005, where George W. Bush was being very difficult, and all the other countries were getting a bit annoyed. And the representative from Papua New Guinea said, if you're not going to lead us, then just get out of the way.
I want to bring in Tom Bateman now, if I can, because he has been listening to those comments by the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn. Of course, he was saying that President Trump was reckless and dangerous, something we've just been talking about here, for pulling out of that climate change deal. He's also been laying out Labour's industrial strategy. Tom, in York, thank you for coming up. I realise it's a busy morning. Reckless and dangerous is what he was saying about President Trump's decision. Strong words.
Yeah, I think we're fast seeing this big international decision become something that is being used for political capital here on the election campaign trail among the parties, because you might remember that last night Downing Street had expressed what it called its disappointment that President Trump had withdrawn from the Paris Climate Agreement. Now, for Jeremy Corbyn giving this speech about jobs and the economy today, it was the very first thing he addressed. He was pretty impassioned on the podium as he talked about this, deeply critical of the withdrawal, saying it would be damaging for the climate, for global warming, but going on to say that in his view he felt that the Conservative leadership, government ministers had not reacted in the way that he would, saying that Theresa May had been silent and subservient yet again to Donald Trump, and then saying that this was in effect the kind of leadership that wouldn't be good enough to get a tough Brexit negotiation for Britain. Now, we know that senior Conservatives, government ministers are saying, well, look, every country has their own way of responding to this, but they haven't signed up to the denunciation of this by 3 other European countries. And again, that was something that Jeremy Corbyn criticised. So I expect to see a lot more political reaction here in the UK as the way that this has been responded to is debated.
Tom, thank you for speaking to us. That's our political correspondent, Tom Bateman, there at that speech made by the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, in York. Still sitting here with Joanna Hagan, Sally Copley. What do you think is the way forward now? We know that President Trump has said he's pulling out of this agreement. We know that the Chinese and European are reaffirming their commitment to it. What should people be doing? Getting in Donald Trump's ear, forcing him to change his mind, or go ahead without him?
Well, I think we can carry on doing all the things that we're doing anyway in terms of developing the new renewable energies and implementing all the energy efficiency measures. And at the same time, the politicians can be talking to Trump and trying to persuade him that actually it's in America's interest to be doing something.
Yes, exactly. We're expecting a really strong statement today from the EU-China summit that happens to be happening today. We're expecting that by lunchtime. And I think the only thing to do is to carry on and just to show him how absurd it is. I mean, President Trump and his administration seem to be behaving as if they can lift America out of the world and thereby isolate it from the impacts of climate change. But that's just not possible. So let's see what happens, because it's really not over. Apart from anything, it's way too late already for it to be over.
Thank you ever so much for coming in. I'm really grateful to you both talking about that. I'm sure this is something that's going to rumble on and we will speak to you again. So thank you for coming in.
I've been getting away with it all.